Again, welcome back. It's good to see all you guys. I only get to see you about once a month. Last year, Father Moriarty and I kind of shared the class. So being every week, I felt I got to know people. I feel bad I haven't gotten to know you guys that well. But let's begin. I'm going to start with a reading from Mark 10. It's a very familiar reading. It's been quoted many times about marriage, and addresses marriage and some of the challenges of marriage very succinctly, but also addresses the whole issue of there have been challenges in marriage going way back, because we're going to be talking about the time of Moses a little bit. Now, how long ago was Moses? Anybody want to pull that off the top of your head?
3,000 to 4,000.
Very good. 3,200-ish, in there. Long time ago. And if you study the Old Testament and even into the New, it's very evident that there were challenges regarding marriage ever since the fall. And that's what we're going to get into tonight. So let's begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. He set out from there and went into the district of Judea across the Jordan. Again, crowds gathered round him, and as was his custom, again he taught them. The Pharisees approached and asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. Now, usually when the scribes, Pharisees were around, they were often, when they asked questions, they were trying to set him up, okay? He said to them in reply, "What did Moses command you?" So again, he's going back to 3,200 years ago. They replied, "Moses permitted him to write a bill of divorce and dismiss her." But Jesus told them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." Now, Jesus is being very distinct here. So let me give you a little bit of my background on marriage. I've been married almost 50 years. This summer it'll be 50. My other qualifications, aside from theology and studied some canon law and things like that, I served in the archdiocese as what did they call it? A field advocate to help people who were seeking declarations of nullity or annulments, as they're called. I probably worked with about 24 folks in 3 different parishes on that. My wife and I served since we were in our late 20s, working with engaged couples. We did that for 30, 35 years. They finally retired us, put us out to pasture. So I may come at this from a lot of different angles, some very technical and some just very, very broad. But I thought we'd start very simply with a definition of marriage. Now, I've got it colored in just in a couple of spots. That which is in the dark green comes directly from the Catechism, although that exact definition actually comes out of the Code of Canon Law that was updated for the last time in 1983. The couple spots where I have the lighter green, those come out of the compendium, which you guys have access to, and just in a couple cases to work it. But let's read this together. And I want you to ask any questions. As we read it through, try to pretend I'm teaching you and preparing you for a test on canon law and marriage, because that's where this would come from. We begin at the top. What is marriage defined as? It's a sacrament at the service of communion. Now, would anybody want to guess what other sacrament has that same title? Sacrament at the service of communion. If you were to go by act of elimination, what do you think it would be? Nope. Nope.
Maybe not holy orders.
Orders, yes. Now, many people think, especially young males, when you might be considering priesthood or marriage or something when you're young, that these are two very, very different paths. And they are in some dimensions. But in reality, these two sacraments are very close. They both are at the service of communion. Okay? And we'll try to develop that a little bit. So let's read. The matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is by its nature ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. Okay. Any questions before we dive into that definition? Because I think breaking that apart is worth it. Yes?
So it specifies baptized person.
Mm-hmm.
Is it viewed differently by
If you're not,
Christians or
non-Christians
non-baptized people marrying?
Yes, or a mix. Let's say you have a baptized person marrying a non-baptized. Okay? So what we're getting at here, notice it says the covenant between baptized persons. So I'm going to pick on my couple over here. My apologies. And your names again? Dawson. And Michaela? Okay. You guys are going to hate me by the time the evening's over. All right. Dawson and Michaela, are you baptized? Are you baptized? Okay. So let's pretend that we're not in a OCIA class. We're not associated with the Catholic Church. We're going to say this is at it's Minnesota, a nearby Lutheran church. There's plenty of those around. And let's say they were preparing for marriage in the Lutheran church. Would we consider that marriage to be a sacrament? We meaning Catholics. Okay, I've got heads going in both directions. I feel like I'm watching a third base coach or a pitcher here. You know, which way, what are we agreeing to? Okay, how many of you say Catholics would consider it a sacrament based on what these two are doing? We'll just say at a Lutheran church. Okay, how many of you would say, nah? All right, a few brave souls say no, including, okay, one of the two aforementioned folks. All right. Well, the answer is the Catholic Church would consider it a sacrament. All right, now trick question. What would the Lutheran Church consider it? Yes, but I'm a sacrament? Would it be a sacrament, I guess is what I'm asking. How many say yes, they would consider it a sacrament? Nobody? Okay, you're right. So here's the weird irony. You got prepared, let's say in the Lutheran Church, you're both baptized Christians, your preparation is proper, everything else. You get married. We consider you sacramentally married. I don't know of a Protestant denomination, maybe there's one exception out there, there are a lot of them, that considers that a sacrament. And if you figured out anything about sacraments, they're very important in Catholicism. They're at the heart of Catholic life, really. Okay. So, great question. Any other questions before I start picking through? Are you already, how many of you are already confused? I've already messed you up completely. All right, well, let's dive in. Matrimonial covenant. What is a covenant? Yeah, let's go a little higher than the word religious, but you're on the right track. It's a sacred, beyond contract, but it's contract on sacred steroids or something, okay? We wouldn't use the term contract, although that has been used sometimes in the past. Later on, we'll get into it. Civil marriage is contract, typically, and we'll develop that a little bit. You might find it in an old canon law book where they referred to it as a contract, but our sense of contract Okay, let's take a look at contract. Any lawyers in here? No wonder I like this group so much. Okay, no lawyer. No, I'm sorry. I've taught. I've had a lot of lawyers go through RCA. Don't ask me why. Maybe it's just me. Let's imagine. Let's try to understand contract law. Okay. Has anyone here bought anything kind of expensive recently? You bought a car, maybe you bought a house, maybe you hired roofers to redo your house last summer, something like that. Anybody bought anything big in the last year? Okay, did you have a contract for it? Yes? Okay. Now, why do you have a contract, let's say, when you buy a car or another expensive kind of item? Why do you have a contract? It's like a warranty, yeah. Yeah. Let's pull that out a little bit more. Could anything go wrong with any of those purchases? Okay, yeah, they can. So you have a contract so that if something goes wrong, you have some means of redressing it. If you bought a brand new car off the showroom floor, and you got 5 miles from the dealer on your way home and the engine fell out, don't laugh. I had a friend of mine who drove a car 30 miles, brand new, and the engine fell out. Actually happened. This is back in about 1970, okay? Yeah, they never put the mounting bolts in the engine. Don't ask me how they did screwed that up, but yeah, that's kind of important. It held in place for a while. The transmission sort of held it there, but eventually bumps and it wiggled loose and out goes the engine. Needless to say, of course, they had a contract and it was all taken care of. Okay. Contracts are understood to be breakable, not necessarily by intent, but by circumstance. So let's say one of you is a roofer and you're going to roof my house. I agree to pay you half the money up front, maybe so you can buy the materials. You agree to get my roof done in a satisfactory, meets code, all that, and then I'll settle you with the other half. That's the contract. What if it's a single guy who's doing the work? He doesn't have a crew, he's doing it all himself, and suddenly he falls off the roof and breaks his back. I've got a problem. I need a roof. So we have to have a contract to somehow figure out a way to do this, okay? So we have contracts, and they're not bad things, but they're designed to deal with a kind of tendency toward failure. It's the nature of them. When you buy your car, when you buy a big television, when you do any of those things, you hope that it all works out well and you never have to look at the contract. Okay, let's move on. By which a man and a woman. Is that controversial? Sadly, in our age, a little bit. If I were teaching you this about 10 years ago, it would have been a lot more so. But our definitions in our country and some other countries allow for a marriage that is different. Now, how might the law, civil law, in our country or states or in other countries be different? What might they allow?
Marriage between men and men, women and women.
Okay, so same sex. How else? What are other variations that you'll see perhaps in about a quarter to a third of the countries of the world?
Marriage between one man and multiple women?
Yes, polygamy. Or in rare cases, polyandry, where you can have one man with multiple, one woman with multiple men. Sorry, that's rare, but it's been known to happen. Okay. But the church, has held all along, it's a man and a woman makes a marriage. Now, I got to ask you guys a trick question. When's the wedding date? No, it's not a trick question.
September 26th.
All right. Clock's ticking, isn't it? Things are happening. Okay. Now, who's marrying you guys? Father Moriarty? Okay. No, he's not. I'm here to tell you, he's not marrying you. He's presiding at your wedding. Notice what it says here. The man and the woman establish between themselves. You're marrying each other. That's rather important to understand in this sacrament. That's one of the things that makes this sacrament unique. And it's what's behind a lot of our understanding of this sacrament. Okay. Sorry about the trick question. Okay. A partnership. What's a partnership? Just think in everyday life. Anybody here ever been a partner other than married? Like in business or in something you did? Okay, not really. Okay. So let's say that we have right here, in these two in the front row, we have two extreme talents. Your name again is? Sam. Sam, okay. Sam can cook burgers better than anybody on earth. He is the magic man with a spatula. Give him a grill and a burger and he's wonderful. But we're going to say, forgive me, he's the grouchiest man on earth. Okay, he's the hamburger Nazi, if any of you. I once watched one episode of Seinfeld and it had the soup Nazi in it. That's the only time I ever watched it. Okay, we're going to say you can't cook a burger to save your life. But she can get along with people, great people skills, welcoming, and so forth. Could these two make a partnership to run a hamburger stand or restaurant? Yeah, they could. In fact, you got all the gifts you need. What would happen if we put Sam out in the restaurant and you behind? This probably wouldn't go very well, okay? Sam would be offending people before they even ordered, and they'd be heading out the door. And if those who hung around ate your burgers, well, it might not go so well. Okay. Partnerships, we establish them all the time, okay? Are partnerships, by their general definition, equal?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but commonly are. Commonly they are considered among equals. And usually if there's not a reasonable equality in a partnership, trouble will develop, okay? If Sam gets so grouchy that you can't stand being in a room with him anymore, then, this restaurant is not going to be long-lived, okay? It's a partnership of the whole of life. In other words, we share until death. Some also will talk about it being you share kind of everything to some degree in marriage. Is by its nature ordered toward, and I'll go through longer here, the good of the spouses, in other words, the good of each other. That's why you're getting married. And the procreation and education of offspring. In other words, to raise and educate children. Those are the two things that marriage is ordered to. Okay? Good of each other. And some people fall into the trap of thinking one's more important than the other. They're both quite important. This covenant, again, sacred agreement between the baptized persons, has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. Okay, quick definition, and then if you got questions, please ask. What if you have, let's say you weren't baptized. You weren't, you were. Would this be a sacrament? No, because you need both. Would it be a marriage? Yes. But it's a natural marriage, not a sacramental one. We'll develop that a little bit more as we go. Okay, any lingering questions? Please don't hesitate to ask. All right, here we go. We want to understand marriage, and I've read many quotes, and I can't remember where I first got this one, so I just put it in brown. It's a path to God. This is why God established marriage. When, by the way, in Scripture, where's the first place we hear about marriage? Not called marriage, but it's marriage. Genesis, yeah. Genesis chapter 1, in fact. 1 and 2 both talk about the marriage of Adam and Eve. In other words, it's created this way. This is willed by God. This is a good thing. Okay? Is it a common path to God? Yeah, historically, of marital age, somewhere around 70 or more % of people are married. Today, that number's down around 50. It might even be a little bit below. It's close in our country. And some other countries ebb and flow. But the general marriage rates now are quite low. Okay? All right, so let's go through a few quotes here and then we'll develop it. Marriage is an intimate community of life and love, which constitutes the married state, has been established by the Creator and endowed by Him, in other words, given by Him, with its own proper laws. God Himself is the author of marriage. Now, do you see why there are challenges when we start messing around with our sense of marriage as God gave it to us? Now, somewhere among the four of us who teach you in this program, I hope it's come across that the church doesn't change what God gives us. It would be insane for us to do so. We can't. That's not allowed. We can change some of the things that man has developed. They do change from time to time. But what God has given us, don't mess with. He's perfection. If you change that, you've stepped away from perfection. Now, how many of you in here are married? Okay. I'm going to ask you a trick question again. How many of you have a perfect marriage? I've got one brave soul who says she's got a perfect marriage. Perfect in every way?
Yeah,
Perfect for you. Okay, good. I like that. There is one way your marriage is absolutely perfect. Who bonded you? Who bound you and your husband together? This is divine glue. It doesn't break. Okay? We know that we're fallen beings, so we have perfectly bonded, imperfect persons, is a way to understand marriage since the fall. But it is in a certain... I was once teaching a class here on marriage. It wasn't part of OCIA, and I had maybe 75 people in the room. Most of them were middle-aged. A lot of them were married. And one brave soul, like here, raised his hand and said, and I knew the guy a little bit, didn't know him well at the time. And he's in a wonderful marriage, and he raised his hand. Now, I think he was doing it kiddingly. Yeah, I've got the perfect marriage, sure. You know, we'll go with that. But in one sense, our marriages are, if God has bound them together. Now, that will come into play later when we try to understand, we'll touch a little bit on annulments in order to understand what it takes for a Catholic marriage or a marriage in general. According to the original divine plan, this conjugal union is indissoluble, as Jesus Christ affirmed in what we just read at the opening. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. This is that second part. It's not just about the couple. The idea is a couple needs to be open to children. Marriage has a purpose beyond just the two. Okay? Now, not every couple is going to have kids. We know that, just statistics. But the having of children is a great good. It's one of the two great goods of marriage. In one of the best books on marriage I've ever read, written back in the 50s, I think, by Archbishop Sheen. Some of you will remember him. He was the great TV evangelist from probably the 50s through the 70s. He actually won an Emmy Award because he had a television show where he had a black, you can see it on some of the religious channels. All he had was a blackboard, but the guy was a great teacher. He said this: the royal destiny of marriage, which is a community of love, as is the Trinity, is to beget something outside of itself. The nuptial chalice, the marriage chalice, if you will, is too small for the love it contains, and therefore it must overflow. The father and the mother leave a memorial of their love in their children. They will testify to the parents who once walked the earth. How many of you are grandparents on? We got any grandparents here? Okay. When you get to that third layer, grandparents, it's a neat gig, isn't it? It really is. It's hard to explain to anybody who hasn't done it. Most people just simply say, well, yeah, because you can have fun with the kids and you don't have to change their diapers and you can send them home when they get bratty. No, that's not it. It's something much bigger. When you see this go 2 generations, that your generosity in having children and then their generosity and, it grows and it gets much bigger than you. But what Sheen is getting at here is, like God, in a certain sense, there was so much love in God that it was rather natural that it would spill out into creation beyond itself. The same thing is true in marriage. It naturally seeks to flow out into something beyond just the two. Okay? Again, not everybody is necessarily graced with children. Or when your children are really acting up, cursed with them, as you might feel. Okay, a few things. Marriage was created as a path to God, a way to live, a vocation that leads us to God. The fall, which we've talked about before in various capacities, we have to be thinking about marriage, this intimate communion of life and love that has those two imperfect fallen beings a little bit. That within marriage, that intimacy can sometimes be like sandpaper, okay? The bad news of the fall is that it's cosmic. In other words, everything. Universal, catastrophic, and it's fairly serious. It's not just a light, trivial matter. And that restoration from that fall is arduous. It's hard work. Okay, those of you who've been married, is it easy? No. It's good, yes, very good. But it's not easy. If you think, you're going into marriage to have an easy life, I'll talk to you after class. I'll be happy to share that with you. It's not easy. No vocation really is. Okay, what's the good news? The echo of original innocence still resides in man. We have a sense of what's good. Redemption, Christ dying to give us grace, to draw us up that path to return to him. Again, we're not merely saved. We can be transformed if we cooperate with God's grace. So there is some recovery always possible this side of the grave. Okay? Union with God and the saints, possible. That's our eternal fulfillment. So, the quiz on marriage. You ready? I've probably said this before. We'll see if they were here that night or if they remember. What's the number one responsibility you take on when you say the words, I do, to each other? Yes, you listened. Okay, good. That's the point. Why? That's the greatest good. Now, let's say that one of you makes wonderful cakes for birthdays and stuff like that. Is that a good thing? Sure. Invite me over, especially if it's chocolate. Okay, but that's great. But that's not the greatest good. Might be the greatest taste, but it's not the greatest good. Okay? Union with God is the greatest good. And marriage with each other, it's a path toward that. You're actually on a journey together. You're side by side. Okay, little theology of marriage. As we said before, it's a privileged expression of human love in the divine plan, a particular fulfillment of the universal vocation to love. We're all called to love. Everybody is. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, it doesn't matter. Okay? It's a particular reflection of the Trinity. We've touched that already. It's a sublime expression of love. Think of the billions of dollars that are going to be spent in less than 2 weeks at Valentine's Day. Okay? Perhaps awkwardly, perhaps badly, but a lot of money will be spent for Valentine's. Going out to dinner. Although not far from my home, there's a White Castle that's famous for Valentine's Day. They bring people in there. I wouldn't want to go to White Castle for Valentine's Day. Never developed a taste for that stuff. Aftertaste, but not taste. In marriage, the physical and the spiritual have no separation, which they don't really in human life in general. We divide them for the sake of understanding, but always remember they belong with each other. Okay? When you separate those two, invariably you get into some levels of dualism. It's an old heresy, goes back even before the time of Christ, that always misleads. As the Catechism says, in the theology or language of the body, as John Paul II would write, written in the very nature of man and woman as they came from the hand of the Creator. Okay? John Paul II went on to put it this way: the man and the woman living in marriage until death repropose uninterruptedly. You know, every day you get up and sort of repropose to each other. I don't think you get down on one knee and ask, will you marry me? But each day you keep agreeing to the next step. I've been doing that for 50 years. Can I ask how long you've been married? Longer than that?
Good example.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
I'm divorced.
Oh, okay.
2 times.
Okay. So repropose uninterruptedly in a certain sense, that sign they made through the liturgy of the sacrament on their wedding day. Okay? So whether you're the elderly couple at the top, the nuclear family down there, probably the extended family here. Now in the rocking chair, I have a picture of my eldest daughter. As you can tell, she doesn't look a lot like me. She's adopted from Korea. She doesn't have any of my genetic handicaps, which are numerous. And in her arms is my youngest granddaughter, who in that picture I think is about 4 months old. So you think of, in a certain sense, when we made that simple decision to adopt, little did we know it was not only going to give us a lovable little girl. Actually, it now gave us 6 lovable little girls because she has 5 daughters. So, and that little one there is now just about 2 on Valentine's Day, ironically, and we watch her every day. So, great gift. Now, so far I've painted what you may be thinking is a very rosy picture of marriage. Marriage has complexities. And the Catechism puts it very succinctly. The dignity of this institution, that is marriage, is not transparent everywhere in both time and place with the same clarity. If you look over the course of history, things happen within a given society, at a given time's treatment of marriage, how it looks at it, how marriage does. How many of you would say marriage is doing really well in our time? Now, I haven't got a single this. I've got a number of these. Okay. Well, we'll try to develop maybe some of the ideas why. Okay? Not in any great depth. We don't have the time, but to touch them. First of all, when we think about marriage, you get married both civilly and ecclesially, at least in our country, if you get married by a religious institution. You can go to a justice of the peace. You can go to Las Vegas. Do they still have a chapel at the Mall of America? I haven't been there in 30 years. So they used to. So you can go there and get married, and that is a civil marriage, okay? You're being married by the government, okay? All right. You can get married in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple. Those are religious. In the United States, the rules are this way, generally. There may be exceptions, but I don't know of them. So when you guys get married with Father Moriarty presiding, he is also acting as an agent of the state of Minnesota. The one ceremony you go through will marry you in the eyes of the church and in the eyes of the state. I've had people go through RCIA in the older days. One couple I had got married in Mexico. And if I remember, I can't remember the order, but in Mexico, the standard thing is you get married in the church, and then I think at the reception afterward, the justice of the peace comes and there's a second set of vows. I talked to someone who got married, I had, again, in an RCA class, from France. And they got married, you literally, and I don't remember the order, you went to the justice of the peace and then you went to church or vice versa. I can't recall, but you had to do it in two different places. Now, there's a certain clarity to those other ways. You know you're being married by two institutions. Understanding that is beneficial. But I don't think I'd want it on my wedding day of having to do the two. That would seem a little strange. I prefer our way. Now, but because there are requirements, for example, okay, have you guys got your marriage license yet? Okay, you got that on the list of 27 million things to do? Okay. Yeah, you have to do that. I'm going to tell you a true story. You're not going to believe it. When we were getting married, part of our preparation, we were going through it. And the priest happened to mention to us, he said, if you were living in Indonesia, and I said, why would you bring that up? He said, one of the requirements of getting married, in order to get that license, you have to bring in 10 dead rats. And you're trying to think, how does that qualify me for marriage? Well, it doesn't at all. But they had a rat problem. And they got all, this is back in the day when we had lots of marriages going on. This is a way we can wipe out rats, or at least radically reduce the population. You got to bring in, I think it was Indonesia. It was some island area country over there, just in case my memory is bad. I remember getting a hoot out of that. Yeah, you got to bring in 10 dead rats in order to get married. It has nothing to do with marriage, but they did that because they were trying to do a civil good of reducing the rat population. I can just see them in Bride magazine somehow trying to work that up into something romantic. I don't think it would work. Now, because the fact you have these two elements, the wires can get crossed, something required by one side and not the other can make it seem awkward, and the language can get clumsy. Let me give you an example of my own wedding. My wife and I were married here in Minnesota, in my wife's home parish in North St. Paul. We had a friend who got ordained a priest about 3 weeks, 4 weeks before we got married, and we asked the priest at her parish if he could preside over our marriage. We probably said, could he marry us too? Okay. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, really, why? And he said, his problem is not with the church. His problem is going to be with the state of Minnesota. He said, I can tell you, it takes a little time for an out-of-state priest to get licensed by the state of Minnesota. So he said, that could be a problem. He said, I have no opposition. He said, love to have him. I said, how about we make life simple? I don't want to make the guy's life miserable. He's just got ordained. He's in that wonderful honeymoon of priestly life those first weeks and months. I said, would you be comfortable with him celebrating the Mass and maybe doing the homily? He said, I'd love it. So we did. But it was the state that said he couldn't actually preside over our vows, not from the church's point of view, but we're also getting married in the eyes of the state. Again, a little confusion. So the civil contract of marriage is dissoluble by its nature. And most, can't say all, most civil marriages are purely contracts. The reason I say not all, in the late 70s, early 80s, the state of Louisiana opened up two kinds of marriage by the state. You could have the civil contract, or you could have a civil covenant. If you had the covenant, divorce would be harder to get. The bar for a divorce would be quite a bit higher. Okay? Again, distinct requirements. We have to understand, why does the state get involved in marriage in the first place? Well, this is the season for that, isn't it? With the W-2s coming out. Yeah, maybe, certainly at times. But it's for a civil good. Marriage is one of the great determinants of the health of any society. The health of marriage and family life is going to do more correspondent good to that society than about anything else going. It's for societal good. That's why they're there. Now, the church's view is different. Societal good is a nice offshoot or benefit of it, of course, but it's eternal good. This is a common vocation to God. And so again, civil versus ecclesial goods or ecclesiastic. And so again, our current awareness of marriage, there are many people in our own time, and I think this is why the marriage rates are now so low, who don't even consider marriage necessarily a good. Okay? So again, civil laws regarding the time or the place you can get married, who or what can get married, are varied. And there's a lot of false assumptions about uniformity in the civil world. The false sense of marriage, in the civil sense especially, has become particularly weak. They have trouble even knowing what it means when we discuss it. Okay? Now for the pictures here, I won't dwell long. Up at the top, anybody recognize the Who's on First, Abbott and Costello? Is there anybody here who's never seen that? All right, for a treat, I want you to go on YouTube and look up Who's on First, Abbott and Costello. It's one of the funniest. It's been around for 70 years, I think, or something. It's hysterical. It'll drive you crazy. But it takes about, 7 minutes maybe or something like that. It's one of the best comedy routines, but it's utterly confusing. And again, we're there. Over here, we have the right below that, the drive-through wedding chapel in Las Vegas. You can get married in your car. Yeah, only in America would you get married in your car driving through, right? But yeah, this really exists. I don't know if you can see it, but you see that rather expensive sports car there? Can anybody read the license plate? Was his. And below that, if you read the fine print, this is a law firm that specializes in divorces, okay? Again, challenge of our age, okay? Not necessarily thinking sacramentally, but thinking rather minimally, okay? And again, we're not trying to cast dispersions upon anyone who's gone through a difficult marriage or has divorced. No, that's not what we're here for. But we do want to understand kind of what's happened or what hasn't happened. Okay. So what do we got? How did all this happen? Good, bad, or not so good? We were created with a gender. There are, in contrary to, recent thinking, there's two genders. Okay. If that's difficult for you, I would think a discussion of marriage is very foolish right now. Okay. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1. Okay. The human person is good, in fact, very good, but we are a bit disordered from the fall. And we talked about some of those disordered. One of the most common ones, and we'll touch on it a little bit later, is egotism. That's one of the chief fruits of original sin, and it's always kind of hanging around us. It doesn't loan well to marriage. It makes marriage more difficult, okay? Female, archetype of humanity. What does that mean? Humanity is the receiver of all God's gifts. In the sexual relationship, the woman is the receiver. The man is the giver. This is why theologians since ancient times have always said that's why Satan tempted Eve. Get her, you got the whole human race. Okay? Original sin attacks receptivity to the gift because we doubt the giver. So then we take taking the apple that was forbidden. Okay? It's the sin of pride. I'm going to do this my way. Okay? The female, like the male, wants to be like God, but without God. We're going to do an end run around him. That's what Eve did. It's what Adam followed with. The male, the archetype is Christ, the initiator of the gift and the guardian of the gift. Okay, so let's go back to you guys. So you're getting married September, right? So let's say it's a November night, 2 months after you're married, and in the middle of the night, you hear a strange knock on the door, pounding on the door, and so forth. Are you going to say, honey, would you go check that out? He better not. Yeah, that's right. Anybody with an ounce of common sense would say, the husband better go first. You know, there's a reason most of us, I don't fit the bill very much, but most of us are a little bit bigger and maybe nastier. You know, we're supposed to be the protectors. Okay. The male is the guardian of the gift. Original sin, again, is an attempt to abolish fatherhood. There's no good father out there. Okay. Even God isn't good. And again, so the male wants to be like God, but not. And we see the great contrast here in these two pieces of art. I've shown this one before, I may again yet. Adam and Eve with their dead son at their feet who was killed by his brother. They knew that they brought sin into the world, and now they're bearing its fruit. And you'll notice the artist beautifully kind of set them, instead of parallel or even at each other, they're kind of turned away a little bit. Whereas in the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, they're very much turned in with each other, okay? The Holy Family is the model family. So, some historical reality in marriage then. We'll go through this fast. We're almost done anyway. Issues between men and women arise. They're going to happen. Discomfort, tensions, at times, in history at least, radical inequality. Okay? If you think of a polygamous marriage, do you have inequality? Yeah. Let's say you got a guy married to 3 women. 3 of them equals 1 of him. That's the implication. That's one of the reasons polygamous societies have trouble. The cause is original sin, that weakened fallen human nature, that omnipresent egotism. Marriage is a path, as we've said. It helps us to overcome self-absorption, egoism, pursuit of our own pleasure, and opens oneself to the other, to mutual aid and self-giving. Now, someone who's married 50 years, I won't say I'm always wonderfully responsive to all that. But almost always it's when I have to recognize eventually, yeah, it's my ego got in the way. Okay. Marriage, again, is a path towards sanctity, toward heaven. And it's the foundation of the domestic church. The family is the domestic church. If you have a lot of healthy families within a parish, you probably got a very healthy parish. Okay? And those two things run together. Having taught for about 50 years in schools, you can see it. I can tell you this, teaching kids who come out of strong families, with exceptions, I always felt guilty getting paid. To those who have come out of the most difficult families, and there were a few of those, you almost can't get paid enough. It's very difficult. So, if we looked at Scripture, if you read from the beginning of the Old Testament up through the time of Christ, in the early Old Testament, after original sin, very quickly we see polygamy. Polygamy shows up in chapter 4 of Genesis. Now, original sin is in chapter 3. Cain kills Abel at the beginning of chapter 4. And a guy named Lamech marries 2 women. And let me read a little line from Lamech addressing the two women. Tell me, ladies, if you'd ever want to marry this guy. He's addressing his two wives, Ada and Zillah. He says, "Hear my voice, wives of Lamech, and listen to my utterance. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for bruising me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." He's threatening them. Don't get out of line. I've killed a man for offending me. I'll kill you. I don't think you want to marry this guy. Okay? So, polygamy. In polygamy, in a certain sense, and certainly in the ancient world, the wife is the property of the husband. That's certainly not the way God meant it to be. Marriage had been thought of as only a civil contract. That's one of the beauties of the book of Tobit, which is not in Protestant Bibles, by the way, typically. I can't say all because I've seen one with it. But marriage is only thought of as a civil contract. See, that's one of the great challenges that Luther brought in, where he viewed marriage only as a civil contract. And the decline of marriage, in my opinion, began then in the modern world. Divorce was allowed in the Mosaic laws we read earlier, but only men could do it. Women couldn't divorce their husbands, but men could divorce their wives. Again, allowed by Moses because of the hardness of their hearts, Christ's words. Later Old Testament, anybody familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba? Okay, who's David? Just for anybody who doesn't know. David is king of Israel. He has a number of wives, and he does something. He's sitting on the castle one day looking down and sees a beautiful woman, Bathsheba, bathing, falls in love, invites her to the castle, gets intimate with her, she gets pregnant. Next thing you know, he's trying to arrange a way for her husband, who's away fighting a war for David, tries to arrange where Uriah, his name, dies. It's a more complex story. First, he tries to get him to come home and sleep with his wife, so it'll kind of cover the pregnancy. But the custom of Israeli soldiers at the time is, I do not enjoy the fruits of home while my fellow comrades are off in battle. And Uriah won't do that. And he goes back to the front. David makes arrangements for him to be set up and killed in battle. Prophet Nathan calls him on it. Wonderful story if you want to read that in 2 Samuel. The Song of Songs in the Old Testament. It's an erotic love poem about God, but it uses a lot of marital imagery. Again, it's very erotic. You'd be surprised at this, perhaps. St. Thomas Aquinas, that's his favorite book of Scripture. We see a gradual, if wobbly, migration from polygamy toward monogamy throughout the Old Testament. Again, part of the covenantal theology that marriage in Israel's covenant with Yahweh. Okay, they tie them together or parallel them. Jesus' first miracle is at the wedding of Cana, where he blesses this young couple who ran short of wine. Now, why is that a problem? Why is running short of wine a big problem? Anybody here spent time in the Middle East? In Middle Eastern cultures, one of the great beauties of it is hospitality is honor. If you can't feed and take care of your guests, that dishonors your family. Jesus was doing more than just giving them a little treat. Little treat. We know from Scripture he made somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of the finest wine. Any of you winemakers out there? So we got no lawyers, no winemakers? No, okay, I can't remember the other one. Well, if you know anything about making wine, can you make wine instantly? No, certainly not good wine. No, you can't even pretend to. Wine takes time, especially reds, which is probably what they had. So going back to Mark, therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. Okay, we're going to get into the technicals right now. And I want to make sure we kind of cover this. So you understand how the church looks at a marriage. In other words, what does your marriage need for it to be fully valid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, first of all, if you get married in a ceremony with any reasonable proper vows, the church assumes your marriage is valid. Okay? That's a little bit like the presumption of innocence when you're charged with a crime, right? The presumption is you are innocent until you are proven guilty. Similar to that, if you go through a marriage ceremony, the church will consider you married unless it can be demonstrated that something was amiss at the time of that marriage. Okay? And we'll get into that. Okay, so what are the essential requirements? And we could say a sacramental marriage, but it could be true of a natural marriage as well. For sacramental, each spouse, as we said, both of them have to be baptized. If not, natural marriage, still binding, valid, but without the grace of the sacrament. There has to be an intent of lifelong fidelity and permanence. In other words, what? What am I saying? So when you take those vows on September 8th, was it? 26th. Oh, I was real close. Is there going to be something in there about as long as we both shall live or something like that? Yeah, that's going to be in there. And that's virtually in any marriage vow. In other words, the intention is you're getting married until death. Okay. Now, why does it say intent? Is it possible that someone can fall off that wagon? Yes, it is. Okay. You have to have that intent, though. You have to have the idea this is permanent. You have to be open to children. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be blessed with them. Historically, about 7% of couples, if both aren't fertile, you're not going to probably have children. I'm sad to say that because of the sexual revolution, and we're living in its backwater now, we have all kinds of conditions, diseases, and so forth that have made fertility much less. Doctors I talk to in the field, I say, where do you think the infertility rates are now? And most of them that I've talked to, whose judgment I trust, will say around 25%. So when you see a couple without children, don't assume they chose not to. They may have, but they may have not been able as well. You cannot seek to thwart conception actively, to do something to stop it, okay? Why? Because that denies the gift of each other within the whole idea of the two great goods. Remember, there's two great goods of marriage, not just the unity of the couple, but the possibility of the procreation and education of offspring. If we just throw a wrench in that, whether it's using high levels of contraception, sterilization, things like that, that gets in the way of that. Now, I'll go off track here just for a moment. Just so you know, divorce rates in the United States were pretty similar across all peoples at a high of about 7% until contraception came on the scene. And I don't know if you know this, those of you coming out of other Christian denominations. Every Christian denomination, Judaism, Islam, they all forbade contraception for the vast majority of history. It's only in recent times has that been broken. The sad thing is the divorce rates within a short time, as soon as contraceptive use started to go up, that's what followed. The divorce rate went up until contraception hit a saturation level, when pretty much anybody who wanted it had it. And then the divorce rate a few years flattened out. But where are our divorce rates at right now about, in other words, we have a young couple getting married. What are their odds of divorce if they're just in the common culture?
50.
Up to 50, yeah. Now, first marriages, it's a little closer to about a third. But then we have those who get, divorced and remarried multiple times. You think of the Hollywood types who do it in, sometimes in double digits. Okay. But yeah, okay, you're absolutely right. That's a very high divorce rate compared to 7. Okay. All right. When you get married, and this is where the work I've done with helping folks do annulments, here's what the church looks at. You have to have the capacity to get married. Now, what do we mean by the capacity of anything? What's that? Okay, so for example, do I have the capacity to get married? No. Because I have a thing called a prior bond. Okay? I'm married. Does Father Moriarty have the capacity to be married? No. He would have to be somehow laicized and given that permission special before he could. And he wouldn't that naturally be given. Okay? We have a prior commitment. Okay? So I'm not free to marry. Even in the United States, if you're divorced, are you free to remarry? Or do you have to get the divorce first? You have to get the divorce first before you can be married again. Okay? Some countries don't require that. Okay. You also have to be able to give free consent. Now, there's a whole lot, I should back up. Capacity could mean lots and lots of things. Let's say, God forbid, that, your name again? Dawson. Dawson goes skydiving sometime before the wedding. And we'll say his chute doesn't fully open. It partially opens. And he hits the ground really hard and he does major head injury. And he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know who you are or anything else. Are those vows, let's forget any healing that might take place. Is he in condition to make vows and live according to them? No. He has such diminished mental capacity, we'd say, no. Let's try something totally crazy. Someone is kidnapped and they fall in love with their kidnapper. By the way, that's not an unusual phenomenon. It's called the Stockholm Syndrome. Anybody, whether Catholic or other, would look at that. If you had someone like that who was married, you'd ask a lot of questions about that. If you sense Stockholm Syndrome, you shouldn't marry them. You shouldn't preside over that. What if you're seriously addicted? Drugs, alcohol, so forth. Serious. Do you think that would help someone make a good decision regarding marriage? In fact, I've known priests who, if they suspect one of the couples or maybe both are prone to drink a lot, not just occasional drink, but I mean get drunk a lot, they will tell them, I've seen this done. If I smell a drop of booze on your breath in the morning, the day of the wedding, I'm not marrying you. We'll stop this. And they're doing a good thing to do that because giving of consent requires a clarity of mind. Okay? So capacity, that ability to be married, and consent that has to be freely given. Now that also implies knowledge. I once assisted a young lady seeking an annulment who married a guy who had very high same-sex attraction. And he kept it hidden because he wanted to be married. When they were married, when it came time to consummate the marriage, psychologically, he couldn't do it. That marriage, needless to say, was declared null by the church. Okay? He didn't have the capacity. to give himself to her. Again, there's lots of scenarios, and frequently most annulments are granted somewhere in this capacity or consent. Something might be amiss there, okay? Or let's say a couple didn't know each other very well, okay? Got married. The age we live in now, how many of you have ever dated online? It's very common now. My experience in married couples, about half of them have met online, okay? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But is it possible then now to have long-distance relationships? Yeah, you can. It's much easier now than it used to be. But a long-distance relationship better have some time that's not long distance, where you're spending time with each other's families and things like that and getting to know. Okay. Again, you have to have a certain level of knowledge. If something is kept hidden from another that they should know, that could be an issue if it were serious enough. Okay, if you're Catholic and you're getting married, you're also bound to Catholic form. You have to get married in the church or with the permission. So let's say you were the Lutheran and you were the Catholic. Could you get married in the Lutheran church as a Catholic? Yes, but he would have to have the permission. It's granted through the church, through the diocese, and you can get that easily, okay? But you have to have that to allow for that. There's other types of marriage, or a Catholic and a baptized non-Catholic is what we're describing there. That's considered a mixed marriage. It's presided over by an ordained minister in the church or with the express dispensation from form in order to be licit or legal, okay? I was a best man at a wedding like that, where it was in the Lutheran church. And in fact, the Catholic priest was in the sanctuary with the Lutheran priest who presided over the vows. What if you have a Catholic marrying a non-baptized? That's considered disparity of cult. That would be a natural marriage, can be done. It does require more circumspection. Why? You've got a greater difference from each other. You got to think about this, okay, a little bit more. If I were going into a mixed marriage with a non-Catholic Christian, I'd have to give that a little bit more thought, hopefully a lot of thought. If I were marrying somebody who's non-Christian, I think a bit more, because again, you've got an inherent, I don't want to say division, but there is a bit of a separation there, okay? Okay, just a few quotes and then I'll finish. The marriage bond has been established by God himself in such a way that a marriage concluded and consummated between baptized persons can never be dissolved. The church does not have the power to contravene this disposition of divine wisdom. So what the church looks at is there something that's gone awry at the time of the marriage, the state that the couple was in, or what was missing or unknown, or whatever. That's how they would say the marriage didn't take place for that reason, okay? A declaration of nullity, or an annulment, as you hear about it, is not a Catholic divorce. What it is, it's a statement that the marriage never took place. There is the equivalent in civil law. It's not common there because they'll just get a divorce. Usually it's easier. But I remember years ago, there was a popular singer named Britney Spears. She was kind of crazy at the time. I don't know if she's still around. She got married, I think it was a Las Vegas marriage kind of thing. And they completely broke up inside of 48 hours. They apparently weren't sober the entire time. The whole thing. Yeah, you can certainly question that. And I believe it was the state of Nevada annulled it. Yeah, this didn't happen. Okay. Christ as the source of grace in this sacrament. The sacrament brings a gift of grace which makes living marriage according to its intended covenant of love and fidelity more likely. Christ dwells within such a marriage, strengthening the spouses. That's the grace of the sacrament, the benefit. Okay. Being the impatient guy of many vices myself, I would hate to have been without the marital graces and also without the sacrament of the Eucharist and confession, which I've had to do many times. Is there anyone here old enough to remember the movie called Love Story? Okay, I've got one here. Anybody else? Okay, now I'm going to nominate. This movie was extremely popular in the
1970.
early 70s sometime, yeah. Oh, it was a rate. They must have made a fortune on it. And do you remember the most famous line from the movie?
Love means never having to say I'm sorry or
Yeah.
something like that.
You quoted it perfectly.
Yeah.
I'll repeat it. Love means never having to say you're sorry. I've been married 50 years. Now, I'm not good at math, but 50 years times 365 days a year, whatever that number is, I would say is probably the number of times I've said I'm sorry. I'm not exaggerating. Okay? Love doesn't mean that at all. Not among fallen beings. We end up having to say we're sorry quite a lot. Because, particularly in my case, fortunately, I married a very saintly woman who has enormous patience. You know, and it's a testament to that patience that, you know, she hasn't killed me. But anyway, anything here, I want to be able to answer any questions, and I'll also hang around if any of you have a private question you want to ask. I'll be glad to do that. But going once. Yes.
So like, for the people that marry, like a Catholic that marries a
Mhm.
non-baptized person,
Mm-hmm.
are they sinners?
A Catholic marries a non-baptized person?
Yeah, the Catholic.
No, there's no sin yet.
No, but like.
I'm not saying they're not without sin. I mean, I'm not saying that about anybody, but
Yeah, but like. So
is it a sin to marry a non-baptized person if you're a Catholic?
Like does the married or the Catholic can receive the Eucharist and all that stuff, or they can?
Yes, they can. Now,
They get free from
I forget the exact, there's a certain permission that goes with disparity of cult, like dispensation from form. That's a little more serious. No, there's no sin in that. Now, the challenge I think you can think about, and this is why you have to think about a mixed marriage, you have to think about particularly a disparity of cult. This may be a harder thing to navigate with your spouse. You know, you go to church, he goes to whatever. Now, can it be done? Yeah. People have asked me, you know, I always recommend you better be members of each other's, like say if it's two Christians, a Catholic and a non-Catholic, you better be members of each other's congregation. And I'm advising you ought to go to church twice on Sundays. It's not an obligation, but you better be around her church enough to help, or his, so you understand, you know, what her upbringing. The trick is they are a bit different, sometimes quite a bit different, and you need to know those differences. I think that's just common sense. You know, if my wife has just gone through 2 cancers, okay, in the past year. So I didn't just, send her off to the doctor. I went with her every time but one, and I was sick at the time, and I didn't want to go to the cancer ward where I'd be sharing the germs while they're infusing people with chemotherapy. So you do those kind of things because you want to know, you want to be as helpful as possible. So again, when there's differences, I think you have to cope with them in order to grow from them. Otherwise, it can be a divisive issue. Yes.
How is it viewed when people, maybe one or both are baptized, I don't know, but when they get married, like fully outside the church, there's no religious component?
Okay, so let's say you're 2 Catholics, but not practicing your faith, so you choose just to get married out in the world, wherever. Okay. It's not ideal, okay, because what's missing from a Catholic perspective right up front? Probably grace. Probably grace, okay? I need grace. I need God's life in me to dispossess some of my own life, right?
And they're not reviewing it the same way.
Right. Now, if that happens, and there's a lot of that today, that's been going on, that's been very common, I would say, for the last 40 years plus. The church has a process called convalidation that a couple like that can go through and have their marriage blessed by the church. I've assisted a number of people, and I've been present at some of those ceremonies, and it's wonderful. Okay, the last one I was present at, after 50 years of marriage, they had it convalidated. It was actually part of then an RCIA class, and we had the mass right before class one night. The entire class came, as well as family, friends, and everything. We were in the church, and we sort of made part of the class a little wedding reception for this couple. Delightful couple, been married 50 years, salt of the earth folks. So that can be done. It can be.
Natural marriage before that.
Prior to that, this would have been from the Catholic perspective, because he had not sought, he was the Catholic, he had not sought a dispensation from form. So hence the church, once that's demonstrated, you can't just automatically assume it's that case. It has to be demonstrated. That's what the annulment process verifies, all that. So once that was done, he got married without form. So hence the church did not consider it valid. But that night, after they went through the preparation and so forth, they just, the line was very simple. They said, yeah, we had a 50-year courtship. And by the way, their children were, I think all but one of their children were present, and their children were middle-aged, kind of thing. It was great, beautiful, great, great couple. So there are avenues and so forth. And people have asked me, I'll say this, I want to make it sound easy. Today, having worked in annulments, and like I say, I've worked with about 24 annulments over the years, different things. People say, the church gives them out automatically. And I say, oh no, not at all. They say, then it gives them out like candy? And I said, oh no. I said, I've never had a case. And I've had several other deacons who, I'm not a deacon, but they are, who do this kind of work. And we have an agreement among each other that if ever we run across a couple that doesn't have a case that comes to us, that we let the other ones know. I'll just say that agreement was made in around the year 2000. There's been no phone calls between the four of us since that time regarding that anyway. It's never happened. So usually when people approach you, when you spend time with them, something has happened. There's a reason, it happens most commonly. And so annulments can be granted. They're not guaranteed, and it's a bit of a process, but it can be done. Anything else? I thought I would close tonight with a letter, and then we'll do a prayer. This is a letter written, I believe, in the 2nd century. Don't quote me on the date. Could have spilled into the 3rd. From an early church father known as Tertullian. Now, Tertullian eventually was declared a heretic. He became a rigorist, one who was really overboard in the practice of faith. But he had some wonderful things, particularly about marriage. And so in spite of his heretical behavior, the church still keeps his writings around because some of them are beautiful. This was a letter he wrote to his wife at the time of their marriage. How can I ever express the happiness of a marriage joined by the church, strengthened by an offering, sealed by a blessing, announced by the angels, and ratified by the Father? You see, that's what an authentic marriage does. How wonderful the bond between two believers, one in hope, one in desire, one in discipline, one in the same service. They are both children of one Father and servants of the same Master, undivided in spirit and flesh, truly two in one flesh, where the flesh is one, one also in the Spirit. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Again, good to see you all, and I'll see you, I think, in about 3 weeks, and I think you're stuck with me a couple weeks in a row then. So it'd be nice to catch up more. God bless.